Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you here. My name is Lenka Procházková. I am head of Cello office, and I would welcome you here in the premises of Czech permanent representation to the EU for the Science Café Future of GMOs. And right now, I would like to give a floor to the director of Czech National Agency for International Education and Research, which Cello is part of. Michal?
Thank you. Dear guest, welcome. I would like to welcome you with a bit of a pessimistic message, but I promise I will get it positive in the end. The reason we are talking about GMOs today is, of course, the pressure of climate change and the need of sustainability. In the light of the fact that we have crossed the threshold of 9 billion of people on the planet, we have to open up a debate on how to feed these 8 billion while mitigating the damage done to the planet. And here comes the positive part. I'm truly happy that I can present to you the speakers who are working on the battlefield of research trying to solve these questions, starting with Veronique Bergougnoux, who is a French researcher from the Catherine Institute of Palacký University in Czechia. And Vojtech Hudzieczek, who is a Czech researcher working in the Institute of Biophysics of the Czech Academy of Sciences. Filip Rolland, the director of KU Leuven Plant Institute, represents Belgium with us here today. And finally, Michael Wrzaczek, an Austrian researcher working in the biology center of the Czech Academy of Science in České Budějovice. So thank you very much and welcome. And all moderated by Gary Austin. Gary, hi. Who traveled from the United Kingdom to orchestrate the debate. So thank you very much. And clap for Gary. Yes. The reason I'm mentioning all the nationalities is that I want to highlight the international cooperation aspect of science, while of course the Czech National Agency for International Education and Research and our Brussels office, Cello, strive for. Lastly, we also want to thank the Czech Center in Brussels. Thank you very much. And the representation of South Moravian region to the European Union, which is in the bottom. Thank you very much. Who help us organize the whole evening. And now I will pass the floor to Lenka. Thank you.
Thank you, Michal. As it was already mentioned, Gary Austin is the moderator of the evening. So let me introduce him a little bit. Gary is the co-founder, director, and senior facilitator with Circle Indigo. He designs, delivers, and facilitates both in-person and virtual workshops, meetings, and events. So, Gary, the floor is yours, and please enjoy the evening.
Okay. Okay, so I'm not sure, is that on now? Yeah? Okay, good. So welcome. I don't need to introduce myself because Lenka has very kindly done that for me. But welcome everyone this evening for coming out. So I'll be the person that kind of is moderating and doing the bits in between. And then we're going to hear from our panel. And then actually we're going to come out to you, the audience, for questions. And we're going to run that in a slightly different way to maybe what you've seen it done before. But what I want to do first is, I know this is really difficult to see, especially if you're that person right in that corner. But so I just want to outline the way that it's going to run this evening. Okay, so we're going to go for about 90 minutes. We're just going to do a little bit more around introductions. So I know that the panel have been introduced, but I'm going to ask them to speak and just say who they are, and in particular to share again which organization, university they're working at, but also maybe their area of specialism and research, okay, just so you know a bit more about them. We're going to have an opening statement. So we have like a top-level opening statement, which is kind of our overarching statement for the evening. And then we're going to share a bit more broader context around why, and Michael is going to do that for us. Then we're going to go into a first, it's not really a panel discussion, but it's about GMOs and gene editing to kind of bring you up to speed a bit more. And I'm sure there are plenty of you in here that know a lot about that anyway. And each of the panel members will share a little bit more information around GMOs and gene editing. Then we're going to come out to you all for some questions, and we'll take questions from the floor, and the panel will respond to the questions. Then we go back into hearing from the panel, but more specifically about the effects of GMOs and gene editing. Then we come back to you again, and then we come back just for some closing comments from the panel. And the way that's going to work with the closing comments is the panel will respond with their closing comments to the discussion and questions that you've shared and asked of them. And then we'll do a quick wrap-up and close, and then I'm going to hand to Wendy, who's going to say a few words from one of the partner organizations that's put on the evening for you. All make sense? Yep, thank you. That's right, audience participation already. Look, you can come again. Okay. So just a couple of, it's like, 4 points that we just want to make sure that we're clear on this evening, okay? So obviously, with you here, and we've got our experts, it's about listening to understand, right? So this is about bringing everyone up to speed, but more specifically, the experts sharing their expert knowledge with you. So please do listen to understand. When we come to audience participation, I said we're going to do it slightly differently, and I'll explain that more when we get there. But what we'd like to do is, if after we've done the first bit of the audience piece, you have a question you'd like to ask, we ask you to step forward, right? Ask your question, but then please step back. That allows other people to also ask their questions, because we want to capture as many questions as we can, okay? When you get asked, if you'd like to ask a question, it's going to sound really odd as well, but once you've asked your question, I'm going to pass you a Post-it pad, right, with a Sharpie pen, because we'd also like to capture your questions so as we don't lose them, okay? So once you've asked a question, and then I'll quickly pass you the pad and the Sharpie pen, and then we can capture the question as well. That's really important, especially if these are experts, right? But even they don't know everything. So, well, maybe just a little bit, right? So if we've got a question from the floor that they can't answer, it's really important we capture it, because then we'd like to make sure we do get an answer for you. Please be respectful of other people's opinions. They may not be the same as yours, and that's okay. So it's also okay to disagree, just don't be disagreeable. So are we good with these? Okay, in which case I'm going to ask our panel to introduce themselves again real quick from my left, your left to right. And they're just going to again say who they are, where they're from, what their area of specialism is. And then we're going to get into the panel itself. Vojta.
Good evening. As it was said, my name is Vojtech Hudzieczek. I'm a research fellow at the Institute of Biophysics in Czech Academy of Sciences in Brno. It's actually, if you don't know how the Brno look like, it's the city on the picture behind me. And we specialize in plant floral biology, which means how do plants develop their flowers, why they do it, how they, what are the processes behind that. And also we explore some methods of genetic engineering in plants. So that's probably.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening. So I'm Filip Rolland from Leuven University, KU Leuven, so not far away from this place. I'm also a plant molecular biologist, doing mostly fundamental plant biology, molecular biology, looking at how plants respond to different stress conditions, trying to improve plant stress tolerance. And I'm also the proud first director of our new KU Leuven Plant Institute. We have one member also in the audience. And so it's a new interdisciplinary institute gathering all the plant research from molecular biology, from molecules to bigger ecosystem studies using satellite imaging, so very broad, both fundamental and more applied research.
Great, thank you. So good evening. I'm Veronique Bergougnoux. So I'm a French expatriated for 15 years in Czech Republic. So I'm working at the Catherine. It's a recently created institute, research institute under the University of Palacky in Olomouc. I'm also plant molecular biologist, and my interest plant is the barley and the rice. So these are two in that. I'm focusing on the roots. This is very interesting organs because it's hidden organs, so it's very hard to study it. But it's like very important because it's absorb the water, the nutrients that are required after for producing leaves, flowers, grains in the yield. And of course, I'm manipulating the gene by overexpressing, silencing, CRISPR, knockout, and
Great.
it's very fascinating.
Thank you, Veronique.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Wrzaczek. I'm born Austrian, and I moved to Czech Republic about 2 years ago, and I work at Biology Centrum in České Budějovice, and there I work as the director of the Institute for Plant Molecular Biology. My group tries to understand how plants perceive and process signals from the environment and how to integrate this information with their development. And to that we also use a lot of plant molecular biology, biochemistry, but also physiology.
Thank you, Michael. So you're going to hear more from them. But actually, this is our first piece of audience participation. You're going to need your phone. So if you've got a phone, a smartphone in particular, you're just going to need your phone, because what we're going to do is we're going to run a little poll. Okay? So if you can see it, if you can pick it up from where you are, you need the QR code. If not, right at the top here, and that's even tinier, so I'll read it out. If you go to your browser, it's www. and it's menti, MENTI.com. Okay, and the code you'll need is 68071703. I can see some of you have already found it. The questions are: GMOs and gene editing can feed the world sustainably and safely while contributing to the protection of the environment. And the options are: no, I disagree. Right now, I don't know, and that's all right. Okay, or yes, I agree. If this one gets really high, we're just going to go home now, right? So I'm joking. Can everyone see that? Everyone's got it. So if you can't see the QR code, it's menti.com, MENTI.com, and then it's 68071703. So we can see roughly how many people have already hit that at 42 down the bottom right. So we'll just let that go a little bit longer. And then what we're going to do at the end of the debate is we're going to run this poll again, right? Just to see if anything shifts. Okay. So most people have done that. So we'll leave that. And I'm just going to leave that on the screen for a little while, just while we get into the first panel discussion. Just so as I know, it might take a few people just a little bit longer to get there. But what we're going to do is I'm going to ask Michael, who is going to talk a bit more to the broader context of this opening statement. Michael.
Yeah, thank you very much. So GMOs and gene editing, and as Michal has already explained, right now, based on our behavior over the last roughly 100 years, humanity faces quite a few challenges. So we need to ensure that we can provide food security, high quality food for an increasing number of people. But we need to do this under adverse environmental conditions, on less arable land, potentially with less resources, less water, and we still need to come out alive at the end. So to that, we have certain tools at our disposal, and it's up to society to decide which tools should or should not be used.
Okay, so very, very high level, broad opening context. But what we're going to do now is we are going to go into the first of our panel presentations, sharing of information. And that first one is a kind of, again, a building even more on what Michael's just said around GMOs and gene editing. So our first speaker on this session is going to be Vojta.
Okay, just a little introduction in the beginning. So, all of life, or what we consider as a life, is, or vast majority, is based on DNA. You know, you have your DNA in most of your cells. It's controlling your eye color, lots of different things like predisposition to diseases and stuff. And the GMO, which stands for genetically modified organism, this allows us to mix DNA from a different organism in one, like to make animal or plant or even microorganism that contain DNA from a sometimes very distant organism. And this we can do to make a different characteristic of the organism that we can then use for agriculture industry or something like that. And there's a more recent technology which is called gene editing, and this is also a method of genetic engineering that we can change the DNA like in a very specific, precise and controlled way. Like we can change even one letter in whole DNA in whole genome, and yeah, without needing to combine and genes from a different organisms. Yeah. So both of these technologies are now available, and they are actually derived from the processes that are generally happening in nature. Even maybe now, every day, there's genetic modification going on in the wild nature. So this is something like we use now as a tool to construct organisms that we can put there some traits for what we desire. Yeah, and I think that's probably for the beginnings enough.
Okay, and now I think we're going to Veronique.
Yes, so I will try to maybe go more deeper to what Vojta said. So, with the history of humanhood, so we, from the moment we start to establish ourselves and we stop to gather, and so we started the agricultures like long time ago by selections. And by choosing something and applying some pressure, so some change occurred. So indeed, all the history is like somehow all organisms are modified because we are putting some pressure. Then at a very early time, what we did for all the hybrids we consume for a long time is that we used the chemistry or the gamma ray to induce mutations, and then we were selecting for years for something that corresponds to the needs of humans. And then with the development of the knowledge of how the bacteria works or how it works inside our cells, so we developed these molecular tools that allow us to manipulate the DNA, to cut, to express. And what is interesting in this GMO, I would say old stage, or GMO, it's like we are able to express, to silence in the very controlled manner. It means in the organs, in the time when we need to have a gene express. And now we have this gene editing, and it's just, I will say, very fast, speeded up process of selections. But we are not letting the environment to make the pressure, because we cannot wait 100 years. We have to react tomorrow, and tomorrow we don't have time to wait.
Okay, and now we're going to hear from Filip.
Yeah, so a little bit maybe overlapping with the previous statements. I think when we discuss GMOs in general, we need to consider two things. First of all, the context that has already been framed a little bit by the both Michaels, is that we're facing major challenges. I think we can all agree on that, and that we will need all the tools we can use, including probably GMOs, in addition to waste reduction, changing our diets, reducing meat consumption, animal production. But any technology we can use will probably need. And secondly, as already discussed a little bit by Veronique, is that we should appreciate, and I think this is important for the debate, that the technology has evolved dramatically in the last decades, and especially in the very last decade. So starting from the conventional breeding, which is based on natural variation, which is obviously something that you need to select better organisms, over mutation breeding, then the classical GMOs that most people are still, I think, considering when we talk about GMOs, and then most recently the gene editing, which is very different, I think, from the previous technologies in that it is much more precise, and that's very important for this debate. Much more precise, much faster, and so I think that, and many scientists believe that the legislation, the regulation is a bit outdated, okay, and that it should be adjusted based on science, based on evidence, and that it should be proportional to the risks and the benefits, and that's an important issue in the debate, I think.
And then Michael again.
So I would like to add 2 points. The first one, building up and maybe elaborating a little bit on what Vojtech said. So the technologies that we use to make genetically modified organisms or to edit genomes, nature has invented them hundreds of or thousands of million years before us. We repurpose stuff that exists in the world around us that happens every day. Bacteria infect plants and they make themselves a home on the plant by manipulating plant growth, and in order to do that they will inject a little bit of their own DNA into the plant, and all of a sudden they have a habitat there. Now, we can take those bacteria and still make them deliver DNA to plants, but then we select what we want to do. The same happens with many of the editing technologies like CRISPR-Cas, that is used by bacteria to defend themselves against bacteriophages, which is a kind of viruses that infect bacteria. So all of those technologies, all of those natural enzymes, those natural mechanisms are already there. So now researchers, we employ our creativity and our thinking, our ideas in order to take those things and do something that we want with that. Now, then what Veronique followed up with, we need to select for traits in plants that we want. We want grapes that don't get as easily infected by mold. We want a rice that doesn't need that much water to grow. But it's not only up to natural selection, because we try to make plants do things or grow under conditions that they themselves have not necessarily an interest in doing so. Okay? A plant that has a natural habitat, if we now want to put it into another habitat, that might not be that trivial, so we really need to select very stringently. And if we wait for this to happen naturally, it might take 100 years, it also might take a few thousand years. So we really want to push what we can do. The same comes with grain yield. Plants don't necessarily want to produce hundreds of kilos of corn, of barley per a limited area of land. But we really try to shift the balance to invest all the resources they can possibly have into providing us with the desired product. That's either grain, that can be potatoes, that can be their fruits. So selection is one part, but selection works only so fast and only to such an extent. So there we really basically try to, on one hand, accelerate the process a little bit, but also it's as if you are splitting a river. We try to make the chance higher that we get 80% or even 90% to the one arm but not to the other. So we really try to shift the balance here. And in order to do that, we can use natural breeding, natural selection, natural variation. We can also use genetically modified organisms. We can use genome editing, all combined with applying the correct selection pressure. And what I would also like to emphasize that none of us here, I think, believes that only one of those tools will be the answer in the end, but that a smart combination of all the strategies together is probably has a higher chance of success than just relying on one thing at a time.
So First panel contributions, and some of that you may have known, some of it you may not have known. But what we're going to do now is we're going to open it up to the audience, but we're going to do that, as I said, in a slightly different way. So rather than just go, does anyone have any questions? And then everyone goes, oh. Or the person that's just got that one question that they really, really want to ask is the first one to put their hand up. We're just going to do it slightly differently. So I want you to consider everything you've heard from all four of our panel, and then what I'd like you to do first is I would like you to turn to the person next to you, okay? And that might be someone you know, it might not be someone you know, and that's okay because you'll meet a new friend, right? And what we'd like you to do is just have a 1 or 2 minute discussion around what you heard. What was it from all of the panel or one member of the panel, not just the last one, because everyone goes, oh, I can only remember what Michael said, right? But from what all of the panel said, what was it that stood out? So just a 1 or 2 minute conversation with the person next to you. And then whilst you're having that conversation, is a question forming, right? So 1 or 2 minutes, person next to you. If there's 3 of you together and you don't want to leave the person out on the end, that's okay. You can go to 3s. So 1 or 2 minutes, and then I'll come back to you with if you've got questions, okay? Just a quick conversation around what you heard so far. What stood out? Okay, so let's just pause. Let's just pause. So what we're going to do now, and I'm really sorry, there was one person in the room that we didn't introduce, which is also really important. So this is Sven. Okay, and Sven, as you can see, is graphic recording the session for us. So not only do you get scribbled post-its, you get a much more beautiful output, both of what the panel are saying, but it's also going to pick up your questions as well. Okay, so Sven, I'm really sorry, that's my bad. So, there was a good buzz in the room. There was lots of discussion going on. Hopefully it was about what the panel said and not what the football scores have been this afternoon and will be this evening. So I'm going to ask, does anyone have, and is anyone happy to, ask our first question? Yeah, okay. And then as I give you the microphone, I'm also going to give you the post-it pad and the Sharpie, if you remember. So ask a question first.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the nice introduction. I was wondering if this technology is so good, why is it almost forbidden, and who is the responsible of it?
Did anyone of one of you pick that up? Yeah? Yep, so grab. So Philip.
Yeah, so it's of course an interesting question. Yeah, well, first of all, I don't think it's forbidden. Right, so the technology is allowed outside of Europe, definitely, and even within Europe, the classic GMOs are not really forbidden. So that's it's highly regulated. It's restricted. So, but in theory, you can apply, and occasionally companies do apply for GMO applications. Who is responsible for the fact that we don't grow GMOs or that they are not approved in Europe? That's a difficult question. I think there's a lot of dynamics, and it's difficult to be specific. I think in the end, I think even EFSA is approving files, but then it gets stuck or at the political level. So at some point, then political decisions need to be made. And I think for many European countries, there's no real benefit to get from some of those applications. I think Europe is also a little bit exceptional in the world that in that we don't really have any problem feeding our people with healthy foods. Although I think our food production sustainability can still dramatically increase. So I think it's a political issue, and then of course, then who is responsible? Of course, politicians, they follow the voters, right? So I think it goes back to the general public and the general feel of people about the possible dangers of messing around with DNA. So I am quite convinced that it's I think the intuitive resistance against changing DNA codes that makes people. So I'm a little bit surprised by the very positive response here, but I think in general
that can change.
That can change, yeah. I think in general people are a little bit suspicious about their foods because of course we have a negative bias towards food security. If we don't need GMOs and we don't really need them at this point in Europe, I guess, why would you take a risk? Okay, but I'm convinced that at some point we will probably have to use them because the challenges we're facing will also affect Europe.
Okay, thank you. Did anyone else want to contribute to that? Wojtek, Veronique?
I also convinced that what is blocking is the opinions, of every people. And we as a scientist, we have our own language. And I think that we are not able to speak differently than in the scientific language. And we should make also effort to say what we are doing, how we are doing, why we are doing. The very best way how to do it is like to have some open doors at the institute when the parents are coming with kids and try to explain the kids what we are doing. They are very good publics. They understand everything. They are able, even they are 5 years old, after to read the DNA and to build their monster. So I think that if we are changing our language, maybe the opinion of the public will change, and then we will be able to make change the staff.
Okay.
And I will just continue on one comment from Filip. I think that we do need GMO already, especially for the questions of the water resource. I think that we are all aware that this year was a really very horrible summer, missing the water everywhere. I think you might have read everywhere in the newspapers the questions of the hunger stone that appear, and they were from the rivers. They appear in the rivers, and then they were written message from the past, but really very, very past. And it was written, if you see this stone, start crying, because it was on the time of famine. So, and also the losses in yield, for example, for barley, because I'm working on the barley for this summer, was 27%. So we have to do something. Yeah, we cannot continue to use the water, and we have to do something.
Thank you. Wojtek or Michael? No? Okay. So thank you for the question. Still scribing. That's good. Thank you. Another question. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. So my name is Svetlana Chvancová. I work for DG Environment now, and I have one question. But it's in fact two questions combined in one. I would be interested to know if you can further explain the differences between gene modification and gene editing, because it's not completely clear for me. And secondly, Filip mentioned the need of change of the legislation, but are you convinced that the timeline of the research results are long enough or statistically proven that we can base the change of the legislation on that, or on them, and to change the legislation now? Thank you.
No worries. And again, thank you. So if you could write the two questions down. So the first one, I think, was about a bit more detailed clarification around the difference between GMO and gene editing. And then the second one is about the timelines to support, or for the regulation to support. So anyone want to pick up? Yeah? So just grab your mic. So Michael, you're going to respond and give us a bit more detail.
The first question, gene editing, or rather genetic modification of an entire genome. What we typically refer to that is we either introduce a new gene under its own regulatory elements, and the organism will read that gene, make the transcript, the RNA, and from that make a protein. Or we can remove a gene from that organism. While gene editing still involves manipulating the genome of an organism, but there we will try to make a change in place, meaning changing one letter of the DNA. That is the same thing that happens naturally in mutation. Probably in your own body, not two cells have absolutely 100% the same genome, because when the cells are copied from the very first one, there is the odd mistake. So that happens every single time. in your body. If you were to sequence every single cell of a 100-year-old oak tree, you would find amazing differences there. So that is that difference. With genetically modified organisms, we either introduce something new or we remove something completely, while with gene editing, we try to do very precise, almost as if with a scalpel, edits where we change one character to another, or two characters, up to us what we want to achieve there.
Can you, to help with that, can one of you give us an example? So can you give us a very specific example, for example, of editing? So what could you change at that very specific targeted level?
What we could change on that specific targeted level, for example, many proteins can be marked in the cell by other signaling proteins. The technical term is, for example, they can be phosphorylated by a protein kinase, but that's not important for you to remember. So as if you run around and you put a post-it note on the back of your friend, all right? So, but this mark will only appear at a very certain precisely defined spot on a certain precisely defined amino acid. Now, if for one reason we want to make a protein not receive this little tag anymore, we could very precisely in place make that site to another amino acid which can no longer receive this mark. So as if you say run around with some post-it notes and put them precisely on the right elbow of other people. Now, if the people were to tuck their elbow in, or you could also chop off their arm, but I think that's frowned upon, then you could not put the tag there anymore. And that's what we could do with editing.
Okay. Helping? Does somebody else want to build on that?
Yeah.
Veronique.
I would like to attract your attention that maybe genome editing is another method of creating GMOs. So look of maybe the classical or the historical GMOs way was to take a gene from the same organisms or different organisms. It could come from the plants, it could come from the bacteria, but then this gene had functions that didn't exist in the original plants. So we are taking the information it can be. So we are calling it either cis or transgenesis if it's from plants, bacteria, or so on. And then here, what we can do is to implement a new pathway. It means, for example, something which I will never support to do, but it's example to have a tomato that will have the taste of the banana. So you agree that the pathway to have the taste of banana is not in tomato, but with the classical GMO or the oldest version, so you can take all the pathway and to put it tomato. Yeah. With the genome editing, it's like you are writing a book and you are using the words or I don't know the software, and in this automatic corrections, I will say. It's like immediately, oh, I have here a character that is bad, and this word is bad. Like, for example, I don't know, what can I say? What can be important? I don't know, my plant will die without sun, or no, it's not a good example, but it's like, because, yeah, but help me to find an example. But it's really like I have a bad words, and then I will just change the letter, and then it's make it good words. So it's like from a plant that cannot resist or that is badly growing in the low water environments, so then I can make it a plant that will not need so much water. So this is also this difference, that in gene editing we are focusing only on the plants. We do not introduce some foreign genes. We are just modifying. So we are making the nature, the mutation that can occur by the sun, the UV lights, which is occurring every day.
So it goes back to what you said around GMOs is modifying it, but maybe interesting in introducing something new, but editing is dealing just with what's already in the plant, using that example. So as, for example, it could grow in an environment that has less water. Does that help? So the second, you have to remind me the second question.
Just if we have sufficiently long baseline of research results for the adjustment in the legislation.
A very good question, by the way. We will also develop it in the second block. So the first GMO plant, like artificial GMO plant, like made in a lab, was constructed in the 1980s. So it's a long time ago. GMO is commercially grown from 90s, early 90s. And so there's been reasonable amount of time to think about what are the drawbacks or what are the advantages and stuff. But we have this long history, and it's not like you make something in a lab and you directly put it outside into the environment. There are many different kind of tests and field trials and even laboratory trials. So I think that taking in account what we can get from it and how quick we should react, as we were urged a while ago, I think the benefit it's really huge, and we have no evidence so far that the GMO as a technology is harmful to the human health or to the environment. So yeah, I think that the scientific record of the data is enough to move to the less restrictive legislation in the EU.
Thank you. And I just wanted to go back to Filip, because it was you that said that you felt that the legislation and the regulation wasn't keeping up as quick as it should be.
Yeah. So maybe going back to the difference in technology. So the conventional breeding that we have been doing for thousands of years is based on natural variation. So occasionally a mutation occurs in the genome, and this can create a benefit, and then we select for that plant with a beneficial mutation, right? And then the classical GMOs, they introduce a foreign gene or a gene from a related plant and insert it randomly in the genome. Randomly. So I understand that we need to check that extensively, because you might create some unexpected effect. But then for decades now, we have been doing mutagenesis breeding. So that's basically mutagenizing plant seeds and introducing an excess amount of random mutations, increasing the diversity in the plants and then selecting plants that have this interesting new trait, for example. But you randomly insert mutations, just like natural mutations, they're randomly occurring in the genome. This is not regulated by the legislation, okay? Because it's considered safe, because we have been doing that either for thousands of years in the case of classical breeding, or for decades in the case of mutation breeding. So most of the food you buy in the store has been created by mutation breeding, so by randomly inserting mutations in the genome. So the new gene editing technologies, they can insert one single mutation rather than 1,000 random mutations in the genome, one single mutation. And still it is regulated, okay, because it's considered potentially unsafe. While random mutagenesis of the whole genome is considered safe because we have been using that for thousands or years or decades in the case of mutagenesis. So it doesn't make sense to regulate something that is even more precise, more controlled than the plants that we have been using, or microorganisms that we have been using for thousands of years. And I think a second point, that you cannot distinguish from a naturally occurring mutation. So you will regulate something that you cannot really even identify as a modified organism, because it just has a single mutation which could have occurred randomly in nature, right? So it doesn't make sense to regulate that in the same way. So that was my point. So I guess you don't expect any negative side effects of that, right? So time frame wise, it doesn't even make sense, I think, to wait for decades to see what might be wrong with that kind of application, because we cannot really even identify it as an edited product. Right?
Thank you. And so we've had two questions from the middle block. Oh, I thought you had a question.
I don't have a question.
I would like to welcome a special guest that just arrived. I couldn't make it on the beginning because they arrived just here. We have a special guest, the Ministry of Education, Vladimír Balaš. Thank you very much for coming here. And also the Vice Minister Václav Velčovský is here also. Thank you, Václav. Václav is responsible for the EU policy, international and intergalactical connections. So thank you very much. And also Martin Fatura, the head of the Department for European Affairs. So thank you for arriving here. And I hope that you will have fun with us. Thank you.
No worries. So we need a question from the block or a question from the block. Anyone have anything? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Hi, my name is Veronica, and I work here at the PEDMREP on the digital issues. So it's a bit outside my agenda, but it's a very interesting topic. And I thought we could perhaps make the discussion a bit more balanced, because I suppose it's not all roses and unicorns. Otherwise, we don't really need to hold the public debates. So I was wondering whether you could focus a bit on the risks, both the risks that you think are relevant as well as the risks that you would disagree with.
So, a discussion around risk. Anyone happy to go first? Go on. Yeah, go Veronique, and then we'll go to Filip.
So I'm so sorry. I will not find any risk in GMO because I'm really a fan of that. The risk can be more what we want to do. Maybe it should be legislation about what we can do. I mean, like to have the tomato with taste of banana, it's absolutely out of mind for me. So we should really identify clearly the problem and to say, okay, it can be open, GMOs, but keeping these directions. Then the risk, honestly, I don't see the risk.
Maybe to add to that, so GMO technology, gene editing technology, they are technologies. And in my mind, technologies are not inherently good or evil. You can use a hammer to build a house, you can use a hammer to build a boat, but you could use a hammer to smash my skull in, which is... Exactly, yes. Well, that's another philosophical debate. I'm not a fan of guns, but it's the same way with GMOs. I mean, you could make a poisonous tomato, sure. That is perfectly possible, but you can also use it in a very safe way. It's about how you use the things that you make with a tool. And the tool itself is not good or bad. Also, to be fair, I'm not a fan of guns, but also the gun doesn't go out by itself and decides to shoot someone. It's the people that use the guns. And you can question why they want them in the first place, but...
Okay, and then Filip, did you want to add something?
Yeah. So I'm not entirely sure there is no risk at all. I think there's a whole gradient of applications, but it's the applications that we should look at case by case. So you cannot really judge GMOs in general, I guess. So like the older technology where you insert a transgene from another organism randomly in the genome, I think that kind of application needs to be analyzed closely, because there might be a risk that it disrupts some other code in the genome, or that the transgene might have another effect in a different genetic background. So there's this whole gradient. There's this application that I'm not really particularly a fan of. That's the herbicide tolerance, where the big company, Monsanto at the time, has introduced a gene that makes the plants resistant to herbicides. So with the big advantage that they can just spray a broad spectrum herbicide, killing all the weeds and having the crop survive. Okay. Of course, if you apply this on 100 million hectares worldwide, you will get tolerant weeds or resistant weeds. Okay, probably increasing the problem or worsening the problem. So that's an example of how the same technology can have a negative effect. And in that case, of course, you need to finish that kind of application. So there's no risk-free application. You cannot be 100% sure there's a risk, but you can limit the risk by using more precise technology. So that's why I think that the latest technology that is so precise that it cannot even be distinguished from natural variation. So we have to judge that in a different way than the GMOs. I'm not saying that all GMOs should be deregulated, not at all. And even the more precise GMOs should be registered and should be followed up if some problem occurs, just like with all varieties that are growing, non-GMO varieties. Yeah, you should take action. Okay, there's no such thing as a 100% safe application. But there's a whole gradient, and I think we now reached a level of precision that should give us the confidence to implement that kind of applications to really help increase the sustainability of our food production and so on.
Okay, Vojtech, did you want to add?
Just a little remark to follow Filip. So there's nothing with no risk. Even when you make a cultivar with a classical non-GMO way, classical breeding, there is even risk for this, that if you release this in an environment, there is a risk of something going bad. It's just what we think it's better to go case by case and look what each of the plant, what animal, whatever cultivar is, what are its characteristics and what are its traits, and not by origin of the method it is this created. I think that I wanted to add.
Just a small addition.
Yeah.
So European legislation is based on the process of how something was produced, while in the rest of the world, in the US, it's based on the product. Okay, if the product is safe, it's fine. In Europe, even if it looks like a safe product that is maybe identical to something you can produce in a non-GMO way, it's considered risky because it was produced using gene technology, right? Which does not really make sense scientifically. You should look at the product, not at the process that was used to make it. Well, that's what most scientists, I guess, feel like.
Okay, thank you. Must be something from this side. Yeah.
Hi, I was wondering if the editing is undistinguishable from natural mutation. How is it that regulation is followed up?
Did you get that? Yeah, Filip.
My answer is exactly our point. Yeah, how can you regulate something you cannot identify as being something that needs to be regulated? At this point, and I want to be careful, as scientists we always are careful, at this point we cannot distinguish gene-edited products from natural variation products, okay? So it does not make sense to regulate that. So that's a big challenge. So even if there will be a new type of regulation that will be proposed hopefully next year or so, the challenge will be to regulate something, to follow up on, to identify the product, to even also for big companies, how can you protect intellectual property of something that cannot really be identified as something unique or produced by a specific technology? So it's a very good question, and I don't know the answer.
Michael?
So at the moment, I don't think we really have an answer for that. But as Filip said in science, never say never. One aspect that I still now felt would be beneficial to the concept of gene editing. So very frequently what scientists do, or what we can do, is we have a plant that we're interested in improving. Then we have another plant that probably is not so useful in food production, biofuel production, but we see that it can grow better under this or that condition. So there's this one enzyme, and it's almost identical, but it has a change in this position. And then frequently we take a lesson again from nature, where we then try to see what a mutation at this point would do in the plant that we're actually interested in. Still, that does not solve your question, because that could still occur naturally. But still, we again, most of the time, go back to nature and try to make changes based on what we see in the variety of plants that we have around.
Okay, so I'm going to pause there, because what I'd like to do is move into the second set of contributions from the panel. And I know, because I've been with these folks all day, that is going to generate another set of conversations for you all and another set of questions. And it will begin to build on already some of the questions that you had. So we're going to talk more specifically about the effects of GMOs and gene editing. And that's going to cover a number of things. So it's going to touch on the health issues, the environmental issues, biodiversity. I think we've even managed to squeeze organic farming in there, and monocultures. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about big companies, and then that leading again into a conversation about IP and a bit more back to the legislation regulation thing. So I think we're going to Vojta first this time.
Okay, so we'll start with the health and environment, which is usually one of the first questions that people ask with the GMO, and this was already asked today, if it's safe enough to grow it, if it's safe enough for human health, if it's safe enough for environment. So at least we said there is more than 30 years of knowing, or nearly 30 years of growing GMOs commercially in the environment, and there wasn't any case reported of the technology, that the technology itself it is harmful. Yeah, this the first point. It's as we said, it depends on the application. So there are many applications, like you can have a plant that are resistant to the pest or to the disease, which obviously increase the yield at the end. We can have a plant which have a different composition, like potato, different composition of starch, which can be used in the industry, not even for consumption. We have also rice that is improved in that way that it has more vitamin for the people. So there are very different like applications of the technology, and of course, if you would go for it, and if you want to make something that is harmful for the people or for the environment, you can do it. I mean, literally you can do it, but it's probably the most difficult way to do it. It's time consuming, it's labor intensive, you need a lot of money to set up the laboratory. If I would want to harm people, I would do it completely different way. So that's probably not the case we would expect of GMO. So yeah, at the end, there is, as I said, nothing goes from the lab directly to your table, to your plate. It's not like that. The GMOs are actually went to several levels. It's multi-level testing of different trials, and it's released until we know and until we're sure that it is safe, and that I think we all think and we all agree that this must be the case in the future. But even though we can slightly remove the restrictions of the legislation. Yeah.
Veronique.
Yeah, I will try to add a bit more on the question of the else. Like, I suppose that when you ask, like, if there are risks, it's because when we are making GMOs, we have to select. And this is in the process where for the selection is very usually we are using antibiotics to select the plants that is GMO. And then there is a very often the fear is that if I will eat that plants that is resistant to antibiotics, I will myself become resistant to antibiotics. And I'm always like very thinking like this, like how can people think like this? I'm eating spinach, I'm not changing myself into spinach. Yeah, because everything what is going inside our intestines is degraded into very small molecules. So the DNA also is not resistant and is not passing the cells to be integrated in the cells. So I will not become resistant to antibiotic because I'm eating GMOs. But on the opposite side, I really think that it has very great positive impact on the health, especially of our farmers, because as Vojta mentioned, one way what we are studying about is like the resistance, or at least tolerance, because it's nothing like 0 and 1. So I prefer to speak about improve tolerance to the pests. Nowadays, our farmers have to put like tons of pesticide, fungicides in the field, and all these molecules are cancerogens. So, do you know any single farmers that is healthy? I don't think. And by using this GMOs, that will be more tolerant to the disease, so then we can decrease. I'm not telling that we will remove it, but at least decrease the amount of chemistry we have to use, and maybe we can protect a bit our farmers from this point, from this. And this is like the pesticides, but it goes also with the fertilizer. Yeah, we can make a plant that will be more efficient to use the natural resource, and we do not have to apply the fertilizer. We have to know that I would say maybe 17%, 80% of the fertilizer we put on the fields are leaking and going to the rivers. So in the rivers, then they are making a trophy of the ecosystem. And also the problem with the nitrate. And this has also a big effect, negative effect on our health. So I really think that using GM can help improve the human living.
Yeah, so another concern that we obviously understand is that people have with GMOs is that they feel that GMOs are stimulating the industrial type of agriculture, like the big scale monoculture type of agriculture. And that's an interesting topic, because obviously in practice many of those applications like the herbicide tolerance are used very efficiently in large scale industrial agriculture. But it doesn't necessarily need to be like that, okay? It's not necessarily linked. You can perfectly use some of those applications, and even better in small-scale agriculture. For example, the BT corn, those are insect-resistant cotton varieties, for example. They are perfectly fit for small-scale agriculture, and they're also used in the global south very efficiently, reducing the pesticide use, which is also beneficial for the farmer himself. And I would also argue even that GMOs are a perfect match for organic agriculture. Okay, if you introduce a resistance gene or even a point mutation, a single letter change that makes your plant resistant against important diseases, that would be a perfect crop for organic farming, right? So I think it's perfectly possible, it's perfectly even advisable to use GMOs in small-scale organic farming. On the other hand, I think we can argue, but that's maybe a different discussion, that maybe monoculture is a more efficient way of producing our food and leaving space for nature. But that's maybe a different discussion.
Yes, I would agree. I mean, the use of monocultures in food production has long predated the use of genetically modified organisms. So there is maybe a correlation at the moment, but there is by no means a causation. So GMO farming doesn't cause monocultures. Monocultures were there before, especially if you look at the vast plains in the USA. They have large amounts of space on which to grow corn. Yeah, sure, they did that. But they also did that before GMOs. But I also would like to come back to the topic that Veronique mentioned about the fear of spreading antibiotic resistances around. And I guess you've all read on the news this or that bacterial strain in hospitals that is resistant to God knows what antibiotics. So yeah, potentially GMO plants could play a role in that. And in the lab, and also when we started to play with genetically modified plants, we would use antibiotic selection markers because they were easy and convenient to track whether we had inserted our transgene in the organism. But if we nowadays were to make a genetically modified plant for production use, we would also make sure that this antibiotic marker would be actually removed before the plant ever leaves the petri dish or the enclosed confinement in the laboratory. So we nowadays have other ways to track whether our transgenic event has actually taken place. And by far, arguably a bigger risk for antibiotic resistances is actually not genetically modified plants, but animal husbandry. where animals are bred on very enclosed spaces. They are given antibiotics, which are often cheaply produced. So basically you supply those animals with an antibiotic, but also with the resistance marker, which can then be taken up by bacteria in the gut of those animals. Then you get a bacterium that has the resistance to this antibiotic. It can happen from plants as well, but I think the likelihood is much higher with other approaches. And that being said, we don't nowadays need to rely on antibiotic resistance anymore for GMO crops that we want to put on the field.
And then I think we were going back to Veronique. Were you going to add something more? No? No. Okay, Vojtech? Okay, no?
Something I also want to mention is that so it's not just the technology for gene editing that has improved, but also the general technology to read DNA sequences. So when a plant is being modified and before putting it in a field, you can actually sequence the whole genome, and you can characterize those plants much better than we could do 5 or 10 years ago. You can even look at all the proteins within being produced by that plant and predict potential allergenic products. You can look at all the metabolites produced by such plants. So the tools to check this for their safety have also dramatically improved. So that in combination with the preciseness of the new technologies, I think it's very important to consider in these applications.
And then did one of you want to pick up, because I know we talked about it earlier when we were having our briefing about IP. Anyone happy to pick up that IP?
Yeah, so first of all, so the new gene editing technologies are being patented. So first of all, there's the patenting of the technology itself, which actually does not make that much sense because, as Michael introduced, these are natural mechanisms that are used by bacteria or other types of organisms, but still they are patented by universities, the UC Berkeley and the Broad Institute in Boston. And there's a whole debate on that. So it's not yet resolved who owns the patent for those technologies. And at the other side, you can also patent a product of the gene editing, so an improvement in a gene or in a specific trait. And then, of course, I think this is a very sensitive issue because that's an important discussion, because we might end up in the same situation where big companies again own the intellectual property of those applications, and then we need to discuss why that is. And actually, maybe the strict regulation might be the cause of that situation. So if you strictly regulate that kind of applications, the application procedure is very painstaking. It's very expensive, and only big companies can afford to bring those applications to the market, which already excludes the smaller businesses and individuals. So this is a very important issue, and I think at some level, also maybe the policymakers here in the room should take action and try to resolve that as fast as possible, because we cannot just leave those tools in the hands of just the big companies. Nothing against big companies, but also smaller players should be able to use them.
Okay, Michael, just to finish off.
I would like to add a little bit here. So, first of all, the issue of patenting is not just an issue for us scientists. It's also a topic for lawmakers, as Filip said, but also probably for ethical philosophers to actually help us out on the way here. And one of the ways forward could be, and I would need expertise from those guys now, to take a similar approach as some software companies have taken, where yes, you have your closed software companies like Microsoft, like Apple, but you also have a lot of companies that use and distribute open source software. And they can still make a profit from that by providing support and everything around. But everyone can look at the code, everyone can use the software for free, modified, as long as credit is given to the person, the company, the university, the team that came up with that. So that could actually also be one of the strategies forward, not preventing companies from making money, but by still making the technology available to other interested parties that maybe with less resources or with help could then also implement such things. But for that discussion, yes, we scientists can contribute, we should contribute, we will have to contribute, but then also lawmakers, philosophers, sociologists probably also should participate in that discussion and also help us. We can deal with the technological side of those things, but the whole societal impact, quite frankly speaking, is a bit much to put only on some few biologists' shoulders.
Okay. Lots in that one, right? Health, environment, biodiversity, monoculture, big companies, small companies, IP, legislation. So we're coming back out to you folks again. So what we'd like to do is to take 1 or 2 minutes again to have a conversation with somebody next to you. Now, of course, if you didn't enjoy the conversation with the person you turned to last time, turn the other way. Right? No, I'm joking. I'm sure the conversations you had were fabulous. So 1 or 2 minutes just chatting with the person next to you again, and then we will come out to you for some further questions based on this last set of inputs, okay? 1 or 2 minutes. Okay. So let's just pause again. So again, we're going to open it to the floor. I'm going to ask you if you have a question. If you have a question, I'm going to come to you with a microphone. You're going to ask your question, and then you're going to write it down as well. So as we capture it on the board, and so as it helps Sven with the graphics. So let's open it up. Anybody have a question? Yes, right in the middle. Cool. Everyone always looks like, always, I've got a question.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Jana. I work in DG RTD, and previously I was a scientist in Brno University of Technology in the field of nanomaterials. Now my focus is on nanosafety, and during the drafting period of the current work program, which was just pre-published yesterday, I was thinking about the application of nanomaterials in agriculture. So I drafted the topic Safe and Sustainable by Design, nano and bio-based agrochemicals. It is my topic, and it was of course consulted with the EFSA colleagues and DG Environment, DG Agri. But I was thinking about what Veronique said about the eutrophication and about excessive use of fertilizer and pesticides. And my question is simple. Do you think that there could be efficient collaboration between you, scientists in the field of genetic modification, and the people who are dealing with such development of new fertilizers which can be targeted to the organs of the plants, either roots or leaves, and avoid such excessive use of these agrochemicals in general? Thank you.
Okay.
So I'm going to need more Post-its. Does someone? Yeah. Okay. Look, Veronica, there's the microphone.
Yeah, because it looks that the question was addressed clearly to me. So, and indeed, it's very interesting that you are like from this nanotechnology area, because in Olomouc we have a center of nanotechnology, and they are working also on using the nanomaterial particles for depollution. Detoxification of the soil, which are polluted. Definitively, I mean, the detoxification by plants is not a new story. It's a lot of people. I mean, already when I was master student in France, so some people had the idea to use, for example, the rose to detoxify or depollute the wastewater, and definitively, I think this is possible to combine. And now also there are like some projects where we are involved in that, trying to use the plants to detoxify and to still keep productions. Indeed, nowadays there are the very fashionable words in the all European applications, which is the circular bioeconomic. So if we look for bioeconomy, it means like to make economy just with the stuff that are, I mean, the products that do not come from the fossil resources. And if we are thinking about circular, it means that I take the resource, I use, I make, I use, I reuse, I make, I use, and then at the end we should like release less as less as possible of waste in the environment. So, and this goes indeed with this. We can clearly do it, like to combine the plants and detoxifying the. I don't know if I answer because.
Okay, no. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, thank you very much. That actually was a really great and cool question. And there are now several projects that I'm aware of on the way of combining nanotechnology with also genetic modification, gene editing, but also to, in addition to GMOs and gene editing, rely on the plant's natural inherent defense system. For example, for defense priming, where a plant will face a pathogen, but it's already in a primed state. That means it's already at a state of high alert. The guards are already on the tower watching out for that pathogen. So that is being combined. And what their nanotechnology plant scientists often hope to contribute is to create containers which are semi-stable, but upon a certain environmental condition could release those compounds, for example. But yes, I think those two fields would have a lot to contribute to one another.
Okay.
Great question, thank you.
Philip, yeah?
Yeah, I was just inspired by your question. It's maybe not answering your question, but this could be also part of what we call precision agriculture. It's also a major development in food production and in agriculture in general, that you don't treat the whole field with a specific pesticide or even fertilizer, but that you can monitor using imaging, using drones or even satellite imaging, to then specifically treat small patches of the field with the needed chemicals, and this would also improve the sustainability of agriculture. So definitely, in addition to gene editing, a lot of new technologies can add to such precision farming and increase sustainability.
Thank you. We love it when an expert challenges an expert. Anything from here? A question from here? Anyone? One right at the back. Two right at the back. Okay, so we'll go here first.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Daniela. I am from Czech Center, Brussels, and I have a question. Does exist the causality between the skin allergies and gluten consumption in the scientific society? And can the GMOs help with the skin allergies and gluten consumption? And thank you for the answers.
Well, you haven't got one yet. If you try it down. So did you get that? So can the GMOs and gene editing help with the skin allergies?
So I have to say I'm not an expert, and I don't think that any of us is an expert on skin allergy. But I know that there is a genome edited wheat that was constructed so that there's a missing piece of the genome, and they reduce it the gluten immunoreactivity by 70%. So for the people who really suffer of this genetic disease, this celiac, they still would have a problems, but those that have intolerance, this might be useful for them.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, I know there was another question at the back, so I'm going to go all the way back.
Thank you. I'm Vladimir Balaš. I'm from Prague. I'm just wondering, because it's got also some other aspects, let's say international trade, and the issues are quite frequently discussed and disputed within the WTO. So my question is whether the GMO products can be considered as a like products under the Article 3 of GATT compared to normal products. So because that's the issue that is really quite often solved by the WTO panels. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Did everyone get that? Philippe? And I'm just going to, so you may not have been here when we said we were asking people to write their questions down. So this young lady is going to pass you a post-it so you can also write your question down for us. Go for it, Philippe.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on the specific articles. What I do know, and that is what is important to know, is that we massively import GMOs. Okay, so GMO production is restricted in Europe. So there's actually just one application growing. There's this Monsanto product, the BT corn, that is growing in Spain mainly. So there's no other GMOs growing in Europe. In Belgium, there's no GMOs growing. In Czechia, I guess there's no GMOs growing at the moment. Maybe they used to grow the BT corn as well, if I'm not mistaken. But we massively import GMOs from South America, from North America, from China, to feed, mainly to feed our cattle, to feed our pigs and cows. So which is a little bit, what is the word? Hypocritical might be the word, yeah. So we don't grow them, right, because it's not safe, but we import them.
And feed them to our animals.
And feed them to our animals. So if you're against GMOs, but you eat meat, okay, that's a big problem.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Another question from here, maybe? Anyone have a question? Anybody have a question? Okay, I'll come to you next. So I'm going to go in the middle and then I'll come to you.
Thank you. Hello, I would have a question because we do speak a lot about the GMOs and gene editing, but my question is, don't you think that the explaining GMOs, okay, you are scientists, so and you work with that, but don't you think that the explaining GMOs to public, their safety, their benefits, etc., it's a lost cause? Because if you check on the internet, for example, and you Google GMOs, you see that you have like a tomato and syringe, or Frankenstein doing something with that. Don't you think that we should rather focus on gene editing, as it might be not so scary to people when we are actually not combining the genes? Thank you.
Vojta.
Yeah, we discussed this earlier this morning. I see that as a multi-step process. That maybe genome editing is now easier to put out the restrictions from it, but I don't feel that there is something like wasting of time explaining people that this can be helpful for our future. I think that there was a poll in the scientific community, and there's actually more consensus on GMO that it should be released in Europe than on climate change in the scientific community. So there's like 98% of scientists are pro-GMO, and like 97 are what we say that they believe in climate change. So it's even more people in science who are actually thinking of it. So I think that we have to. It's our work. We have to explain it. It's like we have to do it. I mean, what can we do?
And I think that's what we were talking about earlier. And I know that and you're right. I think it's a communication challenge rather, right? So did you want to add something to that?
I wanted to add something there. So you asked if we get tired of discussing that, if I'm paraphrasing you correctly.
Just rather distinguish like really between, because if you go to some panels and you have, here there is majority of people actually pro, but if you go to other discussions, there is many people against, and they call gene editing as a new GMO.
Well, it becomes a little bit philosophical, but yes, some days I do think it's a lost cause, especially after I've discussed with my own mother, who doesn't trust me as a scientist. But actually, on most days, no, I don't think it's a lost cause, and we need to keep discussing this, and we need to keep talking to people. And also, honestly, as most scientists, we are in a fairly luxurious position in being able to do what we are passionate about and what we're interested in, and actually society pays for us to do that. So it's one of the least things we should do, to engage in discussion with the public, be it in a panel like this, or be it over a coffee or a beer in a bar with friends. So we should all do this, and no, we won't change that by tomorrow. Likely we will not change it by next year, but we will need to keep discussing this. And as I said, I have my bad days as well when I think it's a lost cause, but I do think overall it's worth it. And I don't build a house with a single tool. I use all the tools I have available. And I think that applies the same to our future.
Okay. So I'm just going to go here, and then I have one at the back, and if we have time, I'll come in.
Thank you. I didn't introduce myself before. I'm a researcher from KU Leuven. I was wondering if next year the legislation is not modified and gene editing is still at GMOs and everything stays status quo, let's say. What are the risks for our breeding companies in Europe and the seed industry in Europe? Because if you cannot identify what is natural variation versus genome editing tools, it can be easily any other country that doesn't care about ethicals or commercial regulations that say I have this amazing product, it's natural and people will buy it, I can tell. And yeah, what's your opinion about this? Thank you.
Yeah, again, difficult to answer, of course. So I'm not sure companies or bigger companies, established companies, will risk that kind of practices because it would be detrimental if for their image and their future. But indeed, in other areas of the world where the regulation is less strict, I mean, I guess it's unavoidable almost that this will happen. So that's why I think we need to act. So not just deregulate GMOs or gene editing, but create a science-based, proportional legislation. I think that's the only guarantee you can have to have a regulated use of such applications.
Yeah, I cannot. It's quite hard also to answer for me, but I will say I can very highly imagine that what will happen if Europe will still continue prohibit GMOs. First, that the scientists will run away from Europe, and then the company will run away and they will go to the country where it's allowed. And then what will be? We will have no agriculture and we will have to import everything. This is my opinion. So somehow we have to. Scientists to have the right to work and to provide the best, and then so I think it might be a run out.
Okay, so I just want to make sure we get this. If we can, we'll do two. If not, we're definitely going to do this one, and then I'm going to ask the person to write their question down. So, question at the back.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mikala Sojdrova, if Mr. Minister said he is from Prague, I'm from Kroměříž, from the Czech Republic, but I'm working here in the European Parliament. My question is, I follow the question the previous speakers. My question is how it was possible that we prohibited GMO in 2001, because the law comes from 2001, European law. And in the same time, we started this massive import from GMO of GMO soja, GMO maize. We feed our cattle in whole of Europe, but we cannot allow we don't allow our farmers to farm GMO, but. We have new opportunity, and we raised this question very strongly up to European Commission. And we have also in the crisis, because now we are solving food security, and this crisis opened also the new opportunity to ask for opening the legislation and also to distinguish, because you researchers, you can maybe, I don't know, I didn't participate from the beginning, but you can distinguish, you can show the difference from GMO and new genomic techniques. There is really differences. And we are supposing that the Commission will work on this in the new legislation. So my question up to you is if there is the way how to open a new legislation with this differences, GMO and new genomic techniques, because you are researchers, you can confirm or not. And the beginning of this prohibition was also my information, what I have, what I got from the people, from some stakeholders, that it was also the big mistake in communication in the time, and which raised many concerns about competitiveness and about also some ideological. And we have, and my question is up to you to help us, because there is the third question about organic farmers, because the biggest, how to say, who fight against, they are organic farmers, because they want only protect the nature without modification. But the solution could be free choice. We don't ask to do it. So excuse me for those three questions.
So it's really about, the question is really about what can the researchers do or suggest to help improve the legislation? And you may have missed a bit about organic farming, so we'll bring you up to speed on that. Okay, any thoughts around what you as researchers and scientists, go for it, can do in order to help improve or change the legislation?
I don't know if I caught all the questions, but the only thing where I want to react on is like if the debate has to be reopened, it should not consider only gene editing, but the I would say ancestor molecular breeding, because all are only tools and they are complementary. There is none of them that can replace the second one. So we need to have all panel of the tools that we can, at the end, have the best products. So this is just my comment on your question.
Is anyone else? Yeah, Philip.
Yeah, I think you made two interesting points. I think safety is a number one priority, much more important than competitiveness, I think. We don't want to be competitive with unsafe products. And secondly, freedom of choice is also crucial for the European Union, I guess. But there we might run into a problem, because freedom of choice means also that you can trace stuff, that you label products. But again, there's a problem with identification of such products, right? So I don't have an answer there. But that will be an important issue. And I think legislation-wise, I think, as I mentioned before, it should be the legislation, the regulation should be proportional. And I think we will have to, it won't be a very elegant, simple legislation, I think. We will have to discriminate between the different types of GMOs and gene editing, and then have different classes of applications with different risks, and also consider the benefits, also the socio-economic benefits, the ecological benefits. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there, but it should be proportional to the risk.
Okay. Now, I'm very conscious there was another question, but I'm also super conscious of the time. So I'm going to ask you, I'll come back to you with the post-it and you can write it down for us. So I'm going to ask the panel just to spend, really quickly, one sentence by way of their closing comment. Based on the discussion that we've had and the questions that you've asked. And I'm going to go in the same order, left to right, if that's okay. And then we've got one more thing to do, and then I'm going to invite Wendy up to the front, who just wants to say a few words. So, Vojtech, closing comments.
Okay, so GMO and gene editing, it's a technology. It's not good and bad, and it's the opportunity for the future. That's for me.
Oh, nice and sweet. Thanks, short and sweet. Excellent. So there's a bar being set here. No, I'm joking.
No, I wanted to come back to communication and explaining the technology to people. I think we scientists have made mistakes in the past. I think we have to be considerate of the people's fears and people's concerns. I think we have to take that seriously, and we have to try to address that in a logic way, and just keep on explaining the technology. I mean, it's up to individuals whether they decide that it's not a good thing or that it's a good thing. But we should explain the technology, and we should be patient and take concerns seriously. I think that's an important task for us as scientists.
Okay, Veronique.
Okay, today we were focusing on GMOs, but we should not forget the initial statement that, and to place everything back to the context of global warming, reductions in resource, and to have to produce, indeed, do we have to produce more or do we have to produce better to feed all the people? Or do we have to change our way of thinking about the food? Do we need to eat like everyday meat? Do we need to eat everyday, I don't know, tons of foods? So we have to think about that. So, and this to save the planet is maybe a bit very like a general way, but we have to save the planet. We have to ensure that our kids will be able to live here and not have to fly to Mars. And for this, we have several possibilities. So we can rethink what we are eating. We can forget about wheat, rice, barley, maize that are seemingly less, no more adapted for the climatic conditions, and then to go to different crops that maybe the millet, oat, or something else, that the rye that is growing in Africa, for example. Yeah, so we can consider this, and GMOs. And I mean, I'm keeping GMOs, everything like gene editing also together is also one tool, one way, and all together will make that we can change our world and to make it like better to live.
Okay, and Michael.
Well, I can only agree with what all the others have said before me, but still emphasizing that it's technologies. They are not inherently good or evil. We do have some remaining issues, for example, with intellectual property rights that we will have to solve, but not scientists alone can do that. And I will agree with Filip that as scientists we should be more ready to discuss on a rational basis without just discarding fears aside, but really discussing them and trying to convince people with data. And yes, if that takes a long time, it will take a long time, but I think it's also part of our duty to society.
Okay, thank you. So we got one, look at this, right? 2, 26, 21. No, I disagree. Right now, I don't know. And yes, I agree. So you're going to need your phones again, okay? So you can, it should still be there. If not, again, scan the QR code, or it's www.menti.com, MENTI.com, and the code is 68071703. No, I disagree. Right now, I still don't know. Or yes, I agree. GMOs and gene editing can feed the world sustainably and safely while contributing to the protection of the environment. No, I disagree. Right now, I still don't know. Yes, I agree. So I just want to say a few thank yous, and then I'm going to hand to Wendy, who's just going to say a few things at the end. So obviously I want to say thank you to our host organizations and partners for putting on the event this evening. I want to say thank you to Sven, who's been busily scribbling away and drawing beautifully on the sheet. Please do take a look at that if you get a chance, get up a bit closer. I want to say thank you to our 4 panel experts for being with us and sharing some thinking and stimulating the conversation. But more importantly, you're the most important people in the room, right? Because you're here to participate and ask questions. So I wanted to thank you all for playing with us, participating with us, and asking some super questions. If you have got a question that you haven't had a chance to ask, then I'm going to put some Post-its and some Sharpies on the front. Grab a Sharpie, grab a Post-it, write the question. Just come and stick it on the board. But I know that Wendy wants to say a few words before we wrap up. So.
Thank you, Gary. And thank you, everybody, to join us today. It was a really interesting evening. I hope you all agree with me. Thank you, Michael, Veronique, Filip, and Vojta, to join us here in Brussels. And again, I would like to thank so much to all the teams of Cello, Czech Center Brussels, and representation of South Moravian region to the EU. And before we will invite you for a glass of South Moravian wine and some refreshments from students of Slavkov High School in South Moravian region, and also Czech traditional Christmas sweets. I would like to pass the floor our honored guest, the Minister of Education, Youth and Sport, Mr. Vladimír Balaš.
Okay. Thank you very much for my floor, and I don't want to take your time too long. You probably learned that by profession I'm lawyer, I'm international lawyer, so I would like to thank Czech Liaison Office for Education Research for this interesting event and an interesting discussion, definitely. Well, my profession is international lawyer, and I deal with international economic law. That's why I asked about the WTO. And to me, it was quite interesting because I have participated in discussion about the similar issue in 1991 in Michigan, at the University of Michigan, and we got to the conclusion that the important is really choice and labeling. And of course, even before the GATT was formed, the issue was discussed because it was not thought as a, I mean, the ban of GMO products was not thought in the United States as an issue of food security, but as a protectionist measure by European Union. And it has proved even after the WTO, and there are numerous disputes within WTO between European Union and United States especially, that deal with food security generally. And well, it's quite important because in the decision making, I mean research, views are really taken seriously, and especially they should be reflected in another international law document which is formed between FAO and WHO, which is called Codex Alimentarius, which deals with food security. And so that's why I was really attracted by this idea, and I thought it would be quite nice to come and to learn more. And then since then it really moved, and in WTO we would definitely have two provisions in GATT, and there are some other agreements, trade, technical barriers to trade, or agreement on sanitary and phytosanitary measures. But in GATT there is Article 3 that you cannot discriminate like products. That was my question, whether you can really consider it as like product. And then in Article 20, general exceptions. So if there is really safety or security endangered, so you can really ban the product. So, and I think still the issue is really issue of protectionism between EU and other countries. And if we allow GMO to Europe, you should try to think how to subsidize your farmers in the European Union. It's not that easy task. So it's really holistic issue, and I'm really once again I'm quite glad that it attracts also attention, not only natural scientists but also lawyers. I don't know whether law is science, but we claim it at the law school, so and it's not only intellectual property. So thank you very much once again, and it was quite interesting and inspirative. And once again, I would like to thanks to organizers for organizing such an interesting event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And two more things. I would like to also thank Sven for his sketchnoting. You can take a look. And one more thing. Thank you, Gary, that you hold all the evening really great. Thank you so much.
So enjoy some nibbles, enjoy some wine. Maybe there's a few more wine-fueled questions. These people are still going to be in the room. Don't back them into a corner. They honestly came to give some great expert opinions. And thank you again for coming. Lovely to see you all.